elders, past and present, and extend this to elders across the continent. The extreme harms that are caused, continue to be caused by invasion and colonisation, are felt today by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander folks in effects like the extraordinary and disproportionate rates of disability that they experience, complex barriers to work, and as we know, the intersections of dispossession and racism produce incarceration rates that are through the roof and that are killing Black folks in this country at an just horrifying rate. Everything we're talking about now, everything we're talking about how the media operates, about the problems and the way we're portrayed, again, disproportionately harms First Nations people, and they have even worse consequences as a result. So I'm once again very overwhelmed at the level of interest in an event that we've put together. We're very lucky to have three brilliant speakers with us tonight. Jeremy and I will be hosting, and we've got Erica, Joey and Mel, who are all wonderful people we've been able to work with in our advocacy against poverty and against the government and against the brutal social security system. And they've all had experience being interviewed by the media, and they all have brilliant opinions and insights about the poverty industrial complex and a critique of how it's affecting all of our lives. So thank you to those in particular who purchased a Solidarity ticket, who were in a position to do so, because it does mean we're able to pay them for their expertise, which we're very glad to be able to do. We have received some apologies from some journalists. So Kate Kelly and Luke Enrique Gomes were not able to be here, but would like to have been here. They have other commitments, but
recording is on.
Okay, sorry, recording's on, okay. But you would hopefully be familiar with Luke and Kate's work. Luke in particular is keen to hear your perspectives, and I've arranged that we'll pass on feedback from tonight's event about how the media is operating and also those pitch ideas, so that he can get a sense of what's been discussed tonight, and I'm sure there'll be other journalists who want that too. And I do believe we'll have some journalists with us in the room, which is really great. It's always, when you put that invitation out there, never quite sure whether people are going to take it up. So I'm just going to pass to Jeremy Poxon now. Hopefully everyone knows Jeremy. I actually didn't introduce myself. I'm Kristen O'Connell. I'm from the Anti-Poverty Centre. I live on the disability support pension, grew up in a single parent household on Centrelink payments, and things are pretty cooked. And that's why I yell about them a lot. And I think most people here already know that I do that. So Jeremy, over to you.
Hello. I don't know if, is my microphone working? My camera isn't.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Cool. I didn't shave, so this is fine. My name's
It was working before.
I'm trying to stream to you all from Jajawarong country in central Victoria. Really, really thrilled you can all be here. And I just want to lay some very, very quick ground rules, putting the principal's hat on. We really want to make this event as interactive as possible. For everybody. We have three wonderful speakers. We want you to be firing off as many comments and questions for the panel in the chat. You should be able to click that button, and a bunch of you already are. Of course, I'll ask if you can please keep all these comments and questions as respectful as possible. All of our speakers, our three main speakers, a lot of us here are currently being starved by the government, and it's very brave of them to put themselves out there like this. For us. Again, the only negative comments we're going to tolerate are ones aimed at politicians, the media, the rich. If you need to troll, you can privately message me. If you need that outlet, that's fine. And because there's going to be, quite a lot of us on here, please do ensure that usual Zoom thing of keeping your microphone muted. So I'm taking my principal hat off, and as a way of sort of starting. To try and make clear what we're trying to accomplish here. Yes, this event has been triggered by a certain program that I'm sure we're going to talk about, but everything we're going to be talking about is much bigger than just one bad SBS show, right? It's about how media has been covering poverty, dealing with people living below the poverty line, for a number of decades, both in the demeaning a current affair kind of way that we're very accustomed to, and in this sort of new, I guess more liberal kind of progressive kind of way, whereby stories are being told, they are empathetic, but they're still requiring rich people to come down and tell them for folks, for example. So what we wanted to do with this session, and I hope what we accomplish, is through our three wonderful panelists, is to make it very clear that they don't need rich people or politicians to speak for them, and they have wonderful ideas for stories and media that would actually be a hell of a lot more interesting than what we're about to watch tonight, and would actually empower them far better. Back to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm conscious too that we did start a little bit behind time. So Jeremy and I did have quite a few things that we wanted to say, as I'm sure everyone who's familiar with our work can imagine. I'm going to skip through pretty quickly and try and get us done with this bit in the next sort of 3-4 minutes. Just so folks know, in January, I was contacted by SBS about this show. It was a really uncomfortable phone call. I declined to give them contact information for people to participate in the show, gave them a great deal of feedback and put a lot of work into that. Jeremy and I have both spent a lot of time doing free work for journalists and helping them do their jobs better, helping not only to find people for them to interview, but also giving them our knowledge and expertise to try and help them do their jobs better. It's nice when they listen, but it's also a lot of work. So I'm just going to hand over to Jeremy to briefly talk about one experience from a person that he worked with who had previously been involved in an SBS production, and it kind of illustrates why we declined to work with them on this show, other than to try and get it to be better.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, a member who was homeless that I was working with a couple of years ago was recruited or cast for another SBS show called Filthy Rich and Homeless. Obviously, I had reservations and fears about it, but as with all things, let them know the risks as well as I could. And if someone wants to do something, and wants that platform, I'm not going to step in their way to do that. I was also a little bit naive as well. This is a couple of years ago, and while I sort of saw these shows as problematic and not ideal, I sort of had the, well, it's either this or nothing attitude. So maybe thought it was still could be worthwhile for people who wanted to be put through the ringer. This person sadly was put through the ringer. This was the season, I don't know if it was season 2 or 3, that they filmed in Melbourne at a lot of around the CBD. This person was was homeless around the CBD. They basically described the process as the celebrity sat next to them on the street. The camera filmed them together. The camera filmed her talk about her pathway into homelessness, an incredibly traumatic story, as most of them are. And then, it was the way they described it to me. It was like the producers was like, okay, we got it. Scene end. They whisked the celebrity out of there. They went to the next scene, which I think was at a soup kitchen or something like that, and left this poor homeless woman shaking and traumatized on the street. And there was no thought given to any kind of aftercare or support services as her, basically what she relayed to me. And this is sort of feedback we've given these producers. And I know, Kristen, I'll hand back to you as well. I know you have given them that kind of feedback. At the bare minimum, they need to look after the participants on the show. But that was sort of a huge alarm bell. And it's always a huge alarm bell with these shows going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Oh, I'm not muted. Whoops, I should have done that. Yeah, we have, I think, like you were saying, this spectrum of experiences and intentions when it comes to coverage of poverty and social security, disability, homelessness. And part of that, in my view, part of the root of that is the fact that we've really normalised that the media and commentators and advocates and people from all different types of across, civil society are permitted to talk about us and our lives without that being a red flag to anyone. So instead of being given control of the conversation in a way that we would expect other groups who are marginalised or having really negative consequences of government decisions to be in control of those conversations, we're not given that. And so it means that when there is a really well-intentioned piece of journalism that in my view, we usually end up seeing something quite one-dimensional that does engender pity and make people feel bad for us, but it doesn't actually change anything. And we did plan to get into some of the discussion around the promotion and framing of the SBS show, but we might try and come back to that a little bit later. I think Jeremy's just maybe just briefly spoken a bit about you know, his journey of like thinking these shows could be all positive, or not all positive, but better than not. But yeah, I think essentially the problem for me is that no matter how well-meaning it is, if there isn't agency and opinion, the ability to criticize and put forward solutions given to the person who's actually experiencing these systems and their consequences, what we're really doing is inviting people who don't share our knowledge to form opinions about us, to consciously or unconsciously develop views. And that, to me, fuels the idea of deserving and undeserving poor. And in terms of the poverty machine and how that all intersects, that leads us to a place where the government can paint a group of people as being the undeserving poor. And so until we can get people to be telling their stories in ways that aren't just their own voice, but also give them a range of ability, like the ability to contribute across a range of perspectives. So this is what happened to me. This is how it made me feel. This is why it happened. Like, this is who's at fault. And I can tell you what I think about who's at fault. I can tell you what I think the solutions are. And I can tell you why I think those people are doing that to me. Until we can kind of have that range of perspectives being included, then I think we're going to struggle with this problem of people who don't understand, meaning well, but really just continuing to fuel that cycle of being othered. So we did have a lot more to say, like I said, but we'll come back to those things because I'm really keen to jump in and talk to Joey and Erica and Mel. We've got a bunch of questions already coming into the chat, which is awesome. So we'll be coming to those soon. Hopefully the wonderful people who are helping us out are popping those in the document that I've got in front of me, and I'll see them in a second. But I'm going to kick off with one of my questions that I had prepared. So I think I'll ask the question and then the three of you can decide who's going to go first, maybe. If you're able to have your camera and camera on, that would be awesome, but totally understand if you can't. So you've all been in the media before, and you know, they may have had positive and negative experiences there. I'm really interested in your opinion on, you know, how you felt about that experience and what you would ask journalists to do differently, what you would tell them about how they might be able to do their job better. And it might not even be about that time you spoke to that journalist, but you could make an observation about just generally how you think journalists could do their job better. So who wants to jump in first? Erica, Joey, or Mel? Mel, I've got you there. Let's go.
So when I spoke, I've done about 4 or 5 different interviews. The one I spoke on the most was a 10 daily, and that was what I think about job seeker going back to the rate that it was. I expected it to actually be positive and people to be positive about it, and I got the opposite. Basically, the story was put in right conservative Facebook groups. I had people telling me that I didn't look like I was starving. I could basically lose weight anyway. Then I had other people actually getting really cruel and saying things about my dad dying, that he would be better off dead. He was passing away at the time. So that, I think, shocked me because of how nasty people actually became. And they judged it on one story. Like they judged it on my hair color at the time was red. I had makeup on. And so they judged me saying that, you know, you're not struggling, you're not doing it hard. And that was all because of the way that it was framed, that, you know, I had extra money. Now that that money was going, then I'd know the meaning of struggling, which, as we all know, we were all struggling before the supplement, but they didn't like put that to anybody. They just said, well, you know, the supplement's going to end. How do you feel about it? So I think the media could have done better in maybe expressing that, instead of just making it sound like I was complaining about like not having stuff. Like maybe they could have explained it in a way that showed that, you know, I was genuinely trying. They had said that I had a few disabilities. They didn't go into any details, which I guess in a way I would have liked them to. So people could have seen that, you know, this person isn't fit to work. This person, you know, isn't bludging, but instead I was told, like, get a job, stop being lazy. You're overweight, so you're not starving, which is great because today I actually found out I have scurvy and I'm malnourished. So, or, you know, so that doesn't take that into effect at all.
Yeah, I think Mel, like, you know, I obviously been seeing those examples from you, and it's that thing we often say is horrifying but not surprising. You know, we see so much of this, and it's the kind of thing, I guess, that sort of experience is what a lot of people fear when they see a show like the one that's going to be broadcast tonight, that those sorts of things may start to happen again. I also think you picked up on something really important that, you know, was something I wanted to talk more about earlier, which was the idea of deserving and undeserving poor. Because of the way these conversations have been happening, there's a sense that maybe if they knew more of your story, and specifically that they would feel less cruel. And, you know, at this point in time, I just feel like there's nothing that gives me much hope that people will just not be cruel until we start to, humanize everyone in these stories more often. And we may never get rid of it, I'm sure we won't, but hopefully through having conversations like these, we can have journalism that has a bit more depth and complexity, that paints all of us as full people and doesn't require people to have a tick box as to whether we deserve to be given compassion or not. Erica, I know you didn't particularly have much that you felt you wanted to talk about in terms of your own interviews, but did you have thoughts on things you've observed, or contributions that you wanted to make, advice that you would like to give?
Ooh. Am I unmuted? Does that work? I've just got a whole lot of stuff coming up on my screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I've had very little experience with the media. I had two interviews. One was a little while ago about it was about students, but I had one recently, and I didn't actually. It would have been good if the person who was interviewing me actually knew about the issues that they were interviewing me about. So like homework would have been great, because I was sort of saying things and he wasn't aware of a lot of the things I was talking about, although he was writing a story about anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have really much to say about this, because I don't have personal experience. So I'm very I was very distressed to hear Mel's account just now about how she was treated. And I think that one of the problems you were speaking about before, Kristen, about this like one-dimensional kind of view of people who live on Centrelink payments or are unhoused, that was definitely contributing. That kind of one-dimensional view was contributing to Mel's treatment. I would suggest anyway that she didn't look the way she was supposed to look, and that, you know, because there is this idea of what somebody who is unhoused or somebody who is living on Centrelink payments should look like, how they should speak. You know, I don't know. So
thank you, Erica. That was absolutely excellent points. And we do have a couple of audience questions, which is fantastic. Thank you very much for those. I'm first going to go to Joey and ask Joey whether you wanted to jump in with your experiences in the media Oh, Joey, if you're...
Yeah, here I am.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, guys. I'm still trying to work out the whole computer thing. First, I just want to say, Mel, I'm really sorry that this has happened to you. I get told all the time that I don't look like I'm homeless, so I completely empathise with you. And when you're living 38% below the poverty line, you can't afford to eat skinny. You can't, you eat bread and bread rolls. You can get 6 for $2 and, they last you a few days and stuff like that. So you eat a lot of carbohydrate and, it's hard to keep, you don't want to buy water unless you buy the great big waters and stuff like that. So, it's really hard to eat well and eat salads and good meat and stuff like that. If I'm in my car, I can't have hot or cold food. I have to eat food that's in a package. So that's never good for you. But my experience, just getting back to the media, my experience has always been quite positive when they've dealt with me. But I think also that's because I've been recommended by Kristen and Jeremy to speak to certain people. So they've always already empathetic to what I want to say. The first one was with Luke at The Guardian, and poor Luke cried and cried because I hadn't ever expressed, I'd been brought up that I had to keep my problems to myself and I couldn't ask for help and all of those things. So for the last couple of, 18 months before I spoke to him, I had kept my problems to myself and I hadn't talked about my situation with anyone, including pretty much people I knew. I don't really have a large social network or support network. So, I'd kept it to myself. So verbalizing it and actually acknowledging that I needed help was huge for me. So Luke really helped me with that. And then I spoke to Laura Murphy-Oates just after we heard when the Liberal government so generously gave us $50 a fortnight, extra. Again, cried. But I was just devastated by what they were doing to us. So, and at first I felt that I sounded really weak in that interview, but, I've listened to it a couple of times and it's hard to listen to because, you can tell how devastated I am, but I really got to articulate the pain and fear that I was feeling. And then just recently I wrote, for Anti-Poverty Week for Power to Persuade, on their website and with Deb Cleland, and she's awesome. And, we worked together on the story. I wrote initially what, I wanted to say, and then she put her journalist bits in and, it worked really well. And it's actually created a huge amount of awareness, which is great. But so my experience has always been positive and I've been able to really talk about my situation. An MP recently called it my homelessness was expertise, and I had to write back and tell her that it wasn't expertise being homeless, it was just being homeless and, struggling to improve my situation, which this is what we need to do. We just need to create, more and more awareness. And the documentary tells me that they just, they really limited what they wanted to show. I felt that the journalists don't know what they're talking about and, it's demeaning in every aspect to not just the people on the show, but to me and Mel and Erica and everybody that's in our situation. So it disgusts me.
Yeah, thank you, Joey. I have to say sorry because I've been banging on at everyone that they have to call us experts because we're very smart. We know a lot about our situation. No, it's good, right? Because this actually is the kind of thing that we would like people to do, is to consider that it might be complex. There might be more to it. We might have different reasons why we ask for different things, and that by probing and exploring that we could have a much more sophisticated conversation. Because I agree that that's a whole other conversation I want to have with you maybe after this, because I don't want everyone to be getting anxious about their question being asked, because we have so many questions, which is wonderful. But I did also just want to pick up on what you said about, and I'm really relieved to hear that you've had positive experiences in the media. And for any journalists who are listening or who look back at this later, that's that takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of hard work from you. And I think that's why so often it doesn't go well, because from the feedback that we hear from people who do interviews, the majority of the time, in a less extreme sense, people do feel used and discarded in the way that Jeremy talked about earlier. And the work that I try to do with folks before they speak to a journalist, before they are interviewed by a journalist, is to prepare them and to say, when you go into this conversation, you have power. You are entitled to ask, the journalist to not use something if you don't like how you said it, or you feel you've shared too much. You don't need to feel, if you feel like they're trying to do some kind of gotcha, you don't need to stay in the conversation. Don't answer any question that you don't want to. And I think for a lot of journalists, you might assume that that is like obvious and natural, but if we're not talking with people who are media performers all the time, it's not always obvious. And that work is also about saying to that person that I can be their advocate. And people don't have a lot of confidence, especially if you've been pushed down and had your power trying to be taken away from you for so long. You don't necessarily feel confident standing up for yourself. So we've done a lot of work to try and help people feel that way. And you also can do that work and help people, by the way you enter those conversations, to feel confident. And I'm very, very happy to spend time with journalists talking through how I run those conversations with people and how you can do exactly the same thing. It doesn't have to be a middle person like me. Okay, I have got so many brilliant questions here. Jeremy, did you want to have a quick look and pick out a question and throw that into the mix, and we'll go from there?
Yeah, and this one, actually, I think there's a couple from Naomi that will build upon what Joey was just talking about building awareness and having the agency and opportunity to do that. So Naomi asks, how do we get people to listen, especially those in positions of authority when they don't want to listen? And a follow-up one is, how do you get journalists to listen and have compassion when balancing competing ideas like clickbait profit and public interest journalism? So maybe Melissa, if you want to jump in and tackle how we get the powerful and the media to listen to us.
Okay, who wants to jump in, if anyone? And obviously, as I say all the time, you don't have to answer any questions if you don't want to. Mel?
I think just by telling our stories and also amplifying other people's stories when they're trying to tell their story. Like, I've had so many people come to me after I've told my story and want to share a part of theirs. And like, I think Twitter's actually been great for me. Like, it's been amazing for me because I'm able to tell my story and I have so much support out there, which is something I never thought I had. But through Twitter, I've also found so many people are scared to tell their story. And so I think amplifying other people with the same stories, also just challenging people's ideas on it. I've been in quite a few conversations, even with like journalists, about what they've perceived and how it's actually very different. Like even things like mutual obligations, stuff like that. They thought you apply for jobs, that was it. Not you got suspended from payments, even if you did attend appointments. So things like that, I think, would be a great way to go about being heard. And even contact members of parliament. Like I've had Jeanette Rice, she actually spoke in parliament and told my story in parliament. So yeah, that was awesome. Also Andrew Lee, he kind of did this press conference kind of thing, mentioning my story, but he never told me I was in it. So I don't know how that worked, but he still shared my story. So I think, yeah, just talk, a lot of talking.
Yeah, I would add, and a lot of yelling, but again, that won't surprise anyone who's seen me do anything. Did Joey or Erica want to jump in on this one about how I think particularly that one about how people who don't want to listen, how we can kind of get at them a little bit. Joey?
I tell everybody that I'm homeless, and people always tell me that I don't look like I'm homeless. Naomi's got another question about, poverty, the media's view being too narrow, and I absolutely agree with that. We have to change the media's view of what poverty looks like, I'm just going to quickly go to the show we're talking about. They show pictures of people just sitting by themselves in the street and, maybe not, dressed for going out or anything like that. But, that's not what it's all about. It's, there's so many different versions of homelessness and different versions of, how people deal with poverty that, but the media just reinforces that we look, down and out or whatever, or scruffy or dirty or, skinny, whatever, and we have to, that's something that we have to actually change perspective, it is too narrow and we need to just keep talking about it. And I think Twitter and Instagram are really good. So, I'm always making comments and upsetting people. So I just am going to keep on doing that.
Yeah, I think making people uncomfortable, as much as it's hard, is one of those ways that we need to try and use what confidence we have to try and break through that wall of like I was saying before, of othering, of like seeing us as objects to be pitied. That like if we actually do make, not just say my story is sad, but actually say I'm really angry and it's not fair, and make people a bit uncomfortable. Ideally, that means we will get to the point where people have to kind of confront what we're saying. I do think we might just have a few people who are some of our participants, our wonderful participants who might be not on mute. I can't actually see how to fix that, but hopefully someone knows how. Erica, did you want to jump in? And then we'll move into the kind of ideas generating session that we talked about. I know we've got a lot of unanswered questions, but I'm going to think about how we handle that while we get to that session. Okay, Erica, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have a lot to add, because for me the question was about how I actually don't know how to get. So the problem is we can say whatever we want to say, we can get angry, we can we can tell our story. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to be represented in the media or by the people that we're talking to. So if there is an agenda and what we say doesn't fit into that, I'm not quite sure how to go about overcoming that. I'm not sure. I did like Mel's suggestion and Joey's as well about just sort of raising awareness ourselves by telling our stories, by being open about our situation rather than feeling like it's something that we need to be ashamed about. I still actually struggle with that a lot. And I think, I'm not at a point where I'm able to actually tell my story properly to people, because I've still got that, I don't know, feeling like it's something that needs to be hidden. So I guess, yeah, the only thing I would suggest is just being open. But in terms of like when you tell your story, you're sort of handing it over to people and they will do with it what they will, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many really things we could draw out in what you just said, Erica, and what all of you have said. The idea that you can control how the things you provide are used is really, it's something I think that if people do have a bad experience, that's part of the reason why, because they think that the way they've shared their story is the way it will be used, and that's not always the case. one of the things for folks who are giving interviews, it's taken a lot of practice for me, but obviously I do them a lot. I was recently told that I've had 400 interviews, unique interviews in the last year and a half, which was a bit alarming. People can tally these things up apparently. So when you're doing that, one of the things that you can become practiced at, or you can think about ahead of time, is making sure, okay, well, if I only want to be portrayed as powerful, I'm going to try and not say some things that, if only used by themselves, could make me look kind of like I have no agency. That's actually like a lot of thinking work. But if we want people to be able to telling their stories in their own way, that's the kind of stuff that I'd encourage people to think about. And I am definitely not as responsive on DMs as I'd like to be. But if you do ever feel like you'd like to share your story, but you're actually just not confident that you would be able to get your story across in the way you want, I will try and work with you to help you do that. Because yeah, when, you know, and that kind of idea of the community amplifying each other, I think is really compelling, because when we amplify each other, we already have a support network around us. When something is put out by a media outlet, you know, things can go really out of control, like they did for Mel, and there's not already an existing community there around you. When we're working together in those online spaces and in those communities we may get those nasty people coming along, but we already have some security and some defenders and some people who understand us. There's so many different ways and things we could be doing. I am going to thank the person who popped in the chat that if you have questions, firstly, we've kept track of all these questions and who asked them. If you have more questions, please do either pop them in the chat or email them through. We're going to try and come up with a cool way of getting back to all those questions. Maybe we will do a little series. This is me just on the fly. We might do a little series where we go through each of those questions and pop them up on YouTube as individual videos, and we could send them out. So that's one way. If you've got other ideas for how we could get through all these questions, that would be awesome. So because I'm really keen to hear from people about ideas you have for how the media could do things differently, whether it's a TV show, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, whether it's journalists interviewing folks. Thank you, Naomi. I saw that. That's great. We have someone with their hand up. Could I get you to pop your question in the chat? That would be really helpful. If that's not possible for you, then please do just maybe unmute yourself if you have to. I don't really have any other way other than chat at the moment to go back and forth with people. But yeah, one of the ideas that we put to SBS is that, and I'm just also let you know, we're on track to finish at 8:15. If we go a few minutes over, the show doesn't start till 8:30. So we should have enough time for everyone to go and get a cup of tea, go to the bathroom, think about more questions you have that you want to pose for later. But we do want to hear ideas that we could actually put forward and say, here, we're not just saying what you did hurts us. We're saying, here's a thing that we think would be really excellent and interesting television. And one of the ideas that we did put to SBS when we were talking to them, and one that Jeremy was the one I think who came up with it, was to have people who are being subjected to the decisions made by politicians or experiencing harmful treatment at the hands of service providers to be put in the workplaces where the people making those decisions are working. Give those people a salary, put them in there. Don't do it for 9 days, do it for 3 months. You know, give people access to those spaces and allow them to kind of have that influence from the inside, and to see from the inside and to show the inside through their eyes, in the way that at the moment what's being done is looking through a person who's quite comfortable into our lives. Let's flip that. And that's the kind of stuff that's like really cool and big ideas, but even the smallest ideas, if you know some really weird and cooked thing that happened at your job agency, like pop it in the chat. So yeah, I guess if you do, as I said, I've got one person with their hand up. I'm going to go to them first. I think it's going to get a lot's going to happen. So we might not get to everyone, but we'll start with JB. No, maybe that's a legacy hand up.
Yeah, no, that's an accidental hand up, sorry.
No worries. Thank you very much. So yeah, I don't want to have to spitball all these ideas, but I will if I'm forced to. Do we have any of our, here we go, Erica, hit me with it.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, did you want us to put our hands up? Or
that's a good idea.
Or pop it in the chat.
I think for
unclear.
these ones, for questions, it's in the chat for sure. Let's keep the chat as an option if we have too many ideas going, right? So pop your hands up. Would love to actually hear from folks and see faces. That would be wonderful. If it gets that we have too many, then we'll kind of move to the chat. But yeah, we'd love to try and actually hear from people and hear their voices if that's possible.
So I really like the idea that you just threw out. I think you're right, it is a big idea, but I think it's great. In terms of like my issue with the way that poverty is represented in the media is that it does show this kind of, like these one-dimensional caricatures of like what people living in poverty are like. And it's not just like, yes, okay, it's really difficult living in this situation, but that is not all there is to our life. We also have other sides to us. So I think if a really cool ideas, I think, for shows could be things that show people living in this situation, showing them as being involved in something creative, problem solving, resilience. Like people don't realize, like I thought it was really funny. I recently got a text message from housing saying that they're going to give select tenants $400 to pay for a course or program that will increase resilience. I don't think people realize how resilient people who are homeless and living below the poverty line actually are. So I don't know, I thought that was funny. So I don't know, a couple of ideas, and I just was having a think this afternoon after you sent that email, Kristen, would be so yeah, I don't know, I guess something more like, if it's going to have like a game showy kind of vibe, like you could do like an actual UBI trial or something, and like if you want to do like a reality TV thing, an actual UBI trial, and document that and see the ideas that people come up with and the way it transforms their lives, or something like I don't know if anyone's familiar with the NICE program, the New Enterprise Insurance Scheme, I think, where you can like come up with a business idea, actually giving people, because people I've met the most creative and hardworking people who are living on the streets, and they have great ideas, and they actually know stuff, and they actually have a lot to contribute. So a show that shows that is able to almost show the inequality as a terrible waste. Like all of these brilliant people that are actually not able to do all of these things because they're just kept in this situation where they're not able to. So or even like I thought of like, you know, a program where people on Centrelink are given the opportunity to teach people skills or share wisdom or something like that. Yeah, I don't know, but basically just flipping things, so showing us as people with agency and with people as people with something to offer, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, those are my thoughts.
That's very cool. You made me think of like you could do a show that's like a mentoring program where a person who's been out of work for ages but actually, you know, has something they're really passionate about and really good at, could actually teach someone who's in a paid job things, because I often feel like I'm doing that. Not that I think that would make an interesting show. There's like actual interesting types of work where that would be cool. I've got Siobhan, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, with their hand up if you wanted to jump in. I can see Siobhan's off mute. Siobhan, did you want to talk and see if we can hear you? Maybe that microphone's... Oh, there, we see someone now. That's great. We can't hear you yet. Do you want to try and chuck it in the chat? Or if not, we can do it over email later, because I reckon these little YouTube videos might be a thing we can do. Maybe you and me could do a little one with your question and your idea. Okay, so I'm surprised. I thought we'd have a lot of people jumping in here. I know that Jeremy has a couple of ideas, and I would like him to sit here and spitball some stuff. Jeremy Poxon, are you still on this call? There he is. Oh, Joey's there too. Joey, why don't you jump in while we see if Jeremy knows how to use a mic?
I'm using a mic. I'm here. I think an idea like, which is an idea I've had, which is like born out of a critique and frustration that these programs continue to air. It's been like a decade now. I think they've been running in the UK for longer. There's like Undercover Boss in America. So sick of it, but out of like the critique of them, which for me is the worst part of these shows and the worst part of how the media characterizes the poor generally. And I know, Kristen, you would have had this experience. I think anyone who's done media has, is where like they have you there as like a case study. In my case, when I was sort of like coming through Work for the Dole and on News Start and stuff, they let me say like the little sad like 10 seconds, then they'll fucking like cut away to some expert who'll tell like the reality of our lives and give like ideas on how we can improve them, right? We're only like the expert for like our tiny slither of misery. We're like little passive avatars of poverty, which I think is like, you know, real, like the real injustice shows like we're about to watch do, whereby, you know, we're rendered kind of powerless. We need rich people to come down and swoop in. It sort of like builds on the show idea that you already mentioned, but something that looks at and would cover, you know, what poor people are doing to get by, how they're organizing themselves, how they're like advocating for themselves. Like imagine some like cool show that like followed, you know, followed Mel and Joey around, sort of like the daily reality of their lives, but also like all the advocating, all the stuff they're doing for themselves, for their communities, building this community, showing that poor people actually have some fucking like political agency and ability to speak for themselves, to change our communities for the better. I feel like there's this like murky hidden narrative that emerges with shows like this, is that, you know, we or poor people don't have the ideas or don't have the ability to solve the crisis they're in, which is complete bullshit, right? It's the problem is they don't have the fucking platform or the resources to do it, because the media won't grant it to them, because the government won't grant it to them, because unions won't grant it to them. Like that's the real problem. But yeah, some show that allows poor people to be political and followed the political creative work, advocacy work that low income people are already doing in their communities, that the people in this chat are already doing. Like I think that would be something a little bit better than what we're about to see, sending the News Corp pipsqueak down to public housing for 2 days. But I won't talk about our friend Caleb anymore. Back to you, Kristen.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we've got some good stuff in the chat. I'll just jump to that in a second. Like you made me think though of the piece that Joey and Luke worked on together. And from an accessibility point of view, like I try to tell journalists if they ask me for comment in writing, like I sometimes find that a lot harder. I have a lot of disabilities inside my head, and that can make it really difficult for me to get them comment, especially in the time frame they want. And there's lots of people who have barriers to articulating themselves in writing when they are very easily able to articulate themselves in other ways. And simply meeting a person where their need is allows that story to be told in that way that actually conveys that complexity. Lots of people might find it hard to talk. So again, like a lot of folks are non-speaking, but are absolutely able to communicate. So on the flip side, if journalists are willing to do an online interview and treat that as being as significant as a verbal interview, you know, those are just ways in which suddenly more stories can be opened up, told in more interesting ways. Conversations being held in a way that a person is more comfortable with is going to mean they can be more they can articulate themselves and say what they want to say more confidently. I want to note Jez's idea. Oh no, I have to scroll up a fair way now. So Jez, who's the comms coordinator for the Unemployed Workers Union, said 12 one-hour episodes where someone travels around the country interviewing unemployed people from all walks of life about how they ended up in the system, how it really affects them, their hopes and dreams, and you know, how that's been destroyed by living below the poverty line. That sounds like an actually interesting show. You know, one of the things I said to SBS is, can you please let unemployed writers write the show? Like, there are people who understand the system who are also trained professionals in your field. Okay, so the chat's moving super quickly. I'm going to go to Siobhan. Siobhan, you had your hand up.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me this time? Sorry.
Well done. Yes.
Technology, yay. So my pitch is I write about hoarding disorder. And the reason that I think this pertains in this, because we're obviously talking about poverty here rather than mental illness or disability, but it pertains here, I think, because it's one behavior that I feel goes all the way to the top of capitalism, and that billionaires are hoarders, but they're not diagnosed with hoarding behaviors because they're not personally negatively impacted by their behaviors the way that a poor hoarder can't. Billionaires have staff to look after their things in a way that a poor hoarder doesn't, and the billionaire is not at risk of interventions such as housing instability or homelessness from their behaviors. But the billionaires do have negative impact in the fact that they're literally affecting everyone else on the planet and the land itself. So obviously you've seen shows like Hoarders where we're represented as like literally disgusting. It's seen as a kind of, you know, horror and trauma porn that is makes people feel better about their lives. Like, you know, as bad as it is, at least you're not a hoarder kind of horror stories. And so, like, again, there's a similar thing of trying to change the narrative, have people with lived experience telling the stories, but also being able to show the counterpoint of rich people's hoarding and looking at how much they have, the 15-car garages, and that it is not even considered hoarding disorder. It's not considered debilitating to everyone. So I think I know it's not exactly the same as what you're talking about, but I just feel there are so many of these shows that get used against us in this way and create the narrative, and we don't get to tell our own stories.
I think it's perfect. I actually think so. One thing, you know, we haven't had a lot of time tonight. I can see Joey's got her hand up and also conscious of the time, so we'll try and keep it super tight from here. But there are like 500,000 disabled people in like job active and disability employment services on job seeker payments. That's a lot of people in deep poverty with disability. These things are intersecting so heavily, but it's the same form of objectification, right? People get objectified for the things that are causing us to be oppressed, essentially. I think that's a really cool angle, and I'm sure we can get, you said you've written about it, I think I'm sure we can absolutely get someone to publish that. So I've got Joey had her hand up, and then I've got Kylie. I'm going to get both of you to be super brief, and I know the chat's moved on. There have been some very cool ideas in there. I won't have time to go back over them, but we're going to get through this, wrap up, give people time to jump on and watch the show. Just so you know what the plan is next from here is to watch on SBS for those who want to, and I absolutely know there are people on this call who've already told me they don't want to watch that show, and I understand, and I'm not suggesting everyone should or has to. But those who do, share along, and then we can jump back into this link later, and we'll be able to debrief. So before we wrap up, we're going to hear from Joey and then Kylie, and then we'll go off, expose ourselves to it if we want to, and then we can come back. So that's you, Joey.
I would rather hear from Kylie, so I won't say what I was going to say. I want to hear from Kylie.
Amazing, thank you. We can maybe do it at the debrief. Kylie, have we got are you able to unmute? I can't see where I can unmute you from. I hear something.
Very sorry. That was me, and I was just intending to applaud and to say thank you all so much for this, which I know time is short, and so there's not really time for plaudits. But thank you all. This has been fantastic. Really good for researchers like me to have exposure to this and to get the expertise of you guys.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. I also I know that there's so many cool things going on in the chat, and I'm really hoping that all of the excellent helpers who've been doing stuff in the chat have managed to capture all of that. I'm going to read out one that I've just been sent from Narelle. I think this would make people understand there are no vulnerable people, but vulnerable situations that impact people's lives. Take away the pity and give back dignity, and that might make people understand that they're by the grace of I might be in this person's shoes. And yes, it is, if we can talk about our past lives, as you know, lots of people have never had the opportunity to have a good job because of all of the factors that we're talking about. Lots of us have, and that's that idea that a poor person looks like one thing, that there's a particular stereotype we have to fulfill. Let us all talk about our expertise, let's actually say, hey, this is what I think. I'm already doing it. I'm telling journalists how I think they should do their job, even though I'm not one. But that kind of thing, more of that. So Joey, it's 8:16. As I said, we're going to have a think about what to do with all these great questions and comments, and maybe do some more YouTube videos or do some live streams. We'll keep people informed about that over the email, which we can do from your Eventbrite registrations. Final housekeeping, we have to thank and as I said, we're coming back in about an hour and a half to do debriefs. So do feel free to come back and chat more in a less formal way if you want to. I want to thank all of the volunteers who have helped make this happen. It's been a lot of work, actually. We didn't expect so many people to be interested, so that made it a lot more work than we expected. I won't go through and name people because I actually didn't ask their permission to do that, but especially want to thank Joey and Mel and Erica. I think someone's already shared their donation links if you want to help. All of us are living on social security payments and have got a lot of shit facing us because of that. So donation links are there. We're on Twitter. The Twitter hashtags for the conversation have been dropped in the chat. Thank you again to everyone who has allowed us to actually pay folks for their expertise. Sorry to use that word, Joey. And if you have any questions that are technical questions, shoot them in response to the Eventbrite email that you have. Thank you also to Jeremy, of course. And hopefully we'll see some of you soon in about an hour and a half back in this room. We'll be on straight after the show finishes, so you can come in from then.